This commitment to diversity informs all aspects of our shared life, especially our worship services. We believe our services should be a space where every individual feels respected for their unique identity and experiences. We are committed to working together to build a truly inclusive and loving community where everyone belongs. So I'm going to share a little bit about myself and some of the service elements today. My name is Mary Mitchell, and it's my pleasure to be your service associate this morning. I'm an elder white woman with short gray hair and glasses. I'm wearing a dark shirt and a colorful scarf, and my pronouns are she, her. We project images and song lyrics on the wall behind me during the service, and during the time for joys and concerns, we can come to you with a microphone, or you can come to the front. Choir members use microphones so that those attending on Zoom can hear the music. Assistive listening devices are available on the table as you enter the sanctuary. These practices acknowledge and celebrate the beautiful diversity of individual needs, abilities, gender expression, and communication styles within our community. If you're visiting us for the first time and would like to learn more about All Souls or about Unitarian Universalism, please fill out a connection card found in the Zoom chat or in the pews, and we'll be happy to follow up with you. Our services are live streamed on Zoom, and if you would like to activate Zoom in a closed caption feature during the service, click the CC icon at the bottom of your screen and select Live Transcript. After the service, our remote participants are invited to stay online for a virtual social hour, and folks in the building are invited to gather in the parish hall for refreshments. Today's chalice words are from Ricardo Levins Morales. Liberation struggles are about restoring power to people whose power has been taken away, which is also a definition of trauma healing. Be a wetland. Detoxify what is upstream. Pass on liberation. Please remain seated for our chalice song.
Rise up, O flame, thy glad light glowing, show to us beauty, vision, and joy.
Now, please join me in reading our congregational covenant. We covenant to create a caring, affirming, and inclusive community.
All right.
That invites us to become
Come on, Zoom.
ourselves and to serve the wider community and the world. And now, Reverend Elizabeth will light our green candle. We light this green candle to affirm our commitment to caring for the planet that is our home. Today, we welcome our guest minister to All Souls pulpit this morning. By now, she's no stranger to All Souls, having been with us both virtually and in person pretty regularly for a number of years. Reverend Elizabeth Nguyen co-directs the National Bail Fund Network with Community Justice Exchange. She is a Unitarian Universalist community minister affiliated with First Parish in Malden and part of the founding team of the Beyond Bond Fund in Boston. And I welcome Reverend Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Mary. And yes, very glad to be worshiping with all of you in person and online again. I'm Reverend Elizabeth. I'm an Asian American person in my 30s. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm wearing a colorful quilted stole. I invite you to just take a breath in and out, and maybe even just feel your feet on the ground, flick your fingers, Maybe give your neck a little roll. Coming into a time of worship, song, silence, and connection, letting go of whatever things were left undone, thoughts flying through our brains to come into a time of community, connection with Spirit. Our opening hymn is number 1022, Open the Window. I invite you to rise in body or in spirit. This is one that has very meaningful words, but can be a bit of a tongue twister. I have faith that our choir will lead us beautifully, but if you prefer to just listen rather than try to keep up, that's great too. Open the window.
Open the window, children. Open the window now. Open the window, children. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Mama and Papa are fighting like snakes. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Babies are crying like her heart will break. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, children. Open the window now. Open the window, children. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Neighbors lock their doors, build fences so high. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Don't see what's discovered on the other side. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, children. Open the window now. Open the window, children. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Borders round countries, borders round the sky. Open the window, let the dove fly in. The only border closure is the border around your mind. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, children. Open the window now. Open the window, children. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Some people have money, some people have none. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Watch the use of money if your heart's gone numb. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, children. Open the window now. Open the window, children. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, let the dove fly in. This big old world is in a great big mess. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, find peace and rest. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, let the dove fly in.
Amen. You all sound amazing. It really helps when you don't have to flip all the pages in the teal hymnal and you can just see the words here. I feel like that is my prayer almost every day these days. The whole world's in a great big mess, and also can we find peace and rest, both at the same time. Our reading this morning is from Native Waters, a Chitimacha recollection with words by Roger Stoof, who's a author, fisherman, tribal member and son of the last chief of the Chirimacha people. Roger's words, "This is how my world begins. The creator of all things moved in thunder across a great sphere of water and knew that perfection was the sole proprietorship of God, so formed the land. He did this by commanding crawfish to swim down below the waters and doing what crawfish still does today, bring up mud into a mound like a volcano's throat. More and more until the mud pierced the surface and dried under the sun. The edge of the sea laps at the margins of crawfish's labor, sifting it away. But rivers move earth from here to there, dumping it back into floodplains and basins. Lakes collect and persist, pools of grace to remind those who live too far away from the sea what lies beyond. There are only 3 things that remain constant in my life. Crawfish continues to build the land, water continues to confront it, and the infinite journey between the two. When they came here, they found graceful, poetic balance of water and land. These majestic swamps and marshes, the towering salt domes and great shell reefs, the rivers slicing courses through the earth, the abundance, the safety. They looked upon the great lake, named it, and forevermore became Sheri Imasha, people of the many waters.
As we gather in community today, we take a moment to share the heartfelt joys and concerns that touch our lives. By sharing these experiences, we connect with one another and create opportunities to celebrate when joy is in the air or to offer support when there are challenges. We'll remain seated for our centering hymn, "The Water is Wide."
Neither have is cold and fades away like morning dew. The water is wide, I can't get o'er, and neither have I wings to fly. Give me a boat that can carry two, and both shall row, my love and I.
Each service, we have an opportunity to give thanks for the blessings we have received in our lives and in the life of our community. Our offering is a chance to give back in support of our work and our outreach. Those on Zoom may submit your offering electronically by following the link in the chat, or you may mail it to All Souls Church at the address provided in the chat. At this time, our morning offering will be given and received.
For years, my grandmother had a mobile home outside of Orlando, Florida, where she would spend the winters. And we would join her in escaping winter to visit, playing sequence with cards on the porch, fishing, and hanging out in citrus groves. And our annual pilgrimage was not complete without a day in Highland Hammock State Park. We would rent ill-fitting rusty bikes, eat orange blossom soft serve, and the highlight, a boardwalk through a cypress swamp with these ancient, enormous trees rising up all around us. The dense canopy of leaves transformed the harsh Florida sun into shade. The vegetation, lush and dense, and as a kid, I could imagine just totally disappearing into the thick of it. Or anything from an alligator to a dinosaur emerging from within it. And the swamp smelled like life, green things, growing, living, dying. Swamps occupy all kinds of places in our imagination. Supposedly, there's such a thing as draining the swamp in a political sense, whatever that means. And much of our cities, from DC itself to the Back Bay here in Boston and many other parts of eastern Massachusetts, were previously swampland. Swamps are often considered obstacles, impassable terrain, dangerous places where who knows what lurks in the mud and the muck. And if you've ever spent time in a swamp without a boardwalk, you know that that can very much be true. But the hammock swamp of my childhood had other associations, a place elemental and old, where what makes a swamp impenetrable is also protective of life within. And I started thinking about swamps across this land, places where humans may have tried to drain or build, but resisted, remaining stubbornly swampy. Wetlands, which are sort of an umbrella term for swamps, bogs, marshes, coastal wetlands, mangroves, are places where there's so much water that everything that grows is adapted to life in saturated soil. And we know that wetlands filter and store water, control flooding, store carbon, provide a home for all kinds of life. And like our chalice lighting words said, detoxify what is upstream. In this time of so much uncertainty, violence, fear, and injustice, I'm turning often to history, to times when people have faced huge uncertainty, violence, and injustice. And so here are two stories of safety in the swamps. One of the Great Dismal Swamp of Virginia and North Carolina, and the other the Atchafalaya Basin of Louisiana, which we heard about in our reading. The Chitimacha tribe, of which Roger Stoof, who wrote our reading, is a part, is the only Louisiana tribe that still lives on its ancestral land, which once stretched the entire Louisiana coastline. The waters, the swamps that the Chitimacha people have lived on for generations are under threat for all the reasons we know: sea level rise, extreme weather. And these threats are not new. In the 16th century, Spanish conquistadors attempted to land ships on Chitimacha land and were beaten back. The French did arrive and began a war against the Chitimacha people, enslaving them. And by the early 20th century, the tribe faced extreme poverty and racism and had only one remaining village. The Chitimacha language, the language of the many waters, almost did not survive. Chief Benjamin Paul and Delphine Stoof were the last two fluent speakers of the language, and they both died in the 1930s and 40s. But before they passed away, they met with an ethnographer who recorded hundreds of hours of stories and vocabulary. Kim Walden, the cultural director for the Chitimacha tribe, says, "It was going out the back door and we caught it right as it was slipping away. If we hadn't, we wouldn't have known if we had the correct pronunciation. My generation wouldn't have known." She says it was a critical point. We say our language wasn't dead or extinct, it was sleeping. And the Chitimacha language is now taught in schools, and via the Rosetta Stone Endangered Language Program is accessible to every tribal member. The safety of the physical swamp may be receding with great sadness. Stoof asks, who are the people of the many waters without the waters? And yet from the brink of loss, the language lives. When I grow despairing at the state of things, as we sang in our opening hymn, the world being a great big mess, I think of people who almost lost their language. Two elders, fluent speakers, fighting to preserve an entire way of life, of culture, to pass down. From our reading, there are three things that remain constant in life: crawfish builds the land, water confronts it, and the infinite journey between the two. We move now from Louisiana to the Great Dismal Swamp of Virginia, where between the 1700s and 1860s, a diverse community of indigenous people, poor and outcast white people, and diverse communities of Black people, both literate, enslaved watermen who worked the canals, and maroons, self-emancipated, self-freed, formerly enslaved people lived together. We know from archaeology, from tools and corners of houses found in the swamp, that robust communities lived on the land, had homes raised up in the swamp. The swamp itself, once the size of Rhode Island, has been described by many as truly impassable to the unguided with clouds of mosquitoes, biting flies, bears, and panthers. They say that Washington could beat the British, but he could not beat the swamp, could not drain it and tame it despite many attempts. The historian Dr. Catherine Benjamin Golden is author of Armed in the Great Swamp: Fear, Maroon Insurrection, and the Insurgent Ecology of the Great Dismal Swamp. And she calls the swamp a landscape of Black power and Black self-reliance. William Byrd II, who was an enslaver and surveyor of the Great Dismal Swamp, called it a city of refuge, and he meant it in a derogatory way. He said in 1728, he spotted a family that called themselves free, and says it is certain many slaves shelter themselves in this obscure part of the world. He said if the problem didn't get under control, the Maroons might rise up and create their own, quote, city of refuge for all debtors and fugitives. He meant it in a derogatory way, but what a beautiful vision. I was surprised to learn that an early book on the Maroon communities of the Great Dismal Swamp was actually written by a Unitarian minister, Reverend Hugo Prosper Leeming. According to his own biography, he identified as a communist in high school, organized with the Union Now movement. He was very proud of his poor white ancestry, and in particular, his great-grandmother, Mary Allen, who helped lead several thousand Black and white women, all of them poor people, in the burning of Richmond at the close of the Civil War, and later fought for the right to vote for poor white and Black people. He researched and wrote the book Hidden Americas: The Maroons of Virginia and the Carolinas. We know about the swamp too from people who passed through there on their way to freedom and wrote about it. Harriet Jacobs, the formerly enslaved author of Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, hid in the swamp on her way north. And she wrote, "Venomous snakes were less dreadful to the imagination than white men in that community called civilized." Reverend Leeming wrote about the organizing and support between the Native and Black communities in the swamp. He said the Tuscaroras, some of the Native people who entered the swamp, were there not as an act of desperation, but a choice. He says it was an alternative to the majority of the nation who had migrated far away, and theirs was the most militant and intransigent of alternatives: to remain nearby but hidden, to fight on. Dr. Catherine Golden wrote, "Nowhere else in the slave-holding South were the enslaved able to accomplish the organization of rebellion so resounding that it reached across state lines, so sustained in frequency and intensity as the Tidewater region surrounding the swamp." She says, for enslaved people in the area, the massive physical presence of the swamp itself encouraged leaps in everyday forms of resistance. She says networks between Maroons, free Blacks, and the enslaved were established across plantations, waterways, and the wilderness of the Great Swamp. Some of the names of leaders who revolted in the name of freedom in connection with the swamp: Captain Peter, Gabriel Prosser, Tom Copper, Tony, Captain Frank, Bob, King Brown, Frank Sumner, Salem, Sancho, Mingo. Not names that I learned in school, but these days, names I think of often. Because what would it have been to have the physical, mental, and spiritual stamina and vision to have been enslaved and to rise up for freedom, to risk life for liberty? These people used the waterways of the swamp to coordinate attacks. They stored guns and ammunition and other weapons in the swamp, and they rose up year after year. This is in the thick of slavery time, before the Civil War, escaping attempts at capture by enslavers and at times being executed for daring to be free. Dr. Golden calls the swamp insurgent ecology. She says the environment of the swamp itself helped support life outside of the control of enslavement. One of the most well-known residents of the swamp was Moses Grandy, author of the narrative of the life of Moses Grandy, late a slave in the United States. He wrote about his time in the swamp. He said, "I went to my old occupation of working the canal boats. I was left on the shore and built myself a little hut, here among the snakes, bears, and panthers." He says, "When I had at last got my free papers so that my freedom was quite secure, my feelings were greatly excited. I felt myself so light that almost I thought I could fly. And in my sleep, I was always dreaming of flying over woods and rivers." Reverend Leeming ends his book with this reflection on the maroon communities of the swamp. He says, "This society has been referred to as the other America, the America that might have been. No," he says, "the America that was, actually was in certain places at certain times." He says, "Alternatives actually existed, and perhaps a sick nation can obtain health through awareness of these alternatives. Perhaps for nations, it is the arduous path that reaches the healing waters. You'd better run, you'd better run, you'd better run to the city of refuge." After buying his freedom, actually 3 times over because of enslavers who stole his earnings with the money he earned running boats in the swamp, Moses Grandy became an active abolitionist, traveling to London to speak, using the money from the publication of his memoir and as a free laborer to purchase the freedom of his wife, his children, grandchildren. And in 2000, Eric Shepard, Moses Grandy's great-great-great-nephew, wrote a book, Ancestors' Call, memorializing Grandy, and is part of a coalition pushing for the swamp to be recognized as a National Heritage Site. Tools used by Maroons in the Great Dismal Swamp are on display at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, less than a mile from where the current president sits in the White House. The Chitimacha language lives even as the physical swamp in the Atchafalaya Basin is under attack. From Roger Stoof, "The graceful poetic balance of water and land, these majestic swamps and marshes, the abundance, the safety." When we started going to Highland Hammocks State Park, my grandma used to ride bikes with us. And when she could no longer bike, she would walk part of the loop. And when she could no longer walk, my mom would drive her, waving at us on our bikes. When she could no longer make the journey south to Florida at all, we stopped going to the swamps, and we haven't been since. But I think it's time now to look to those swamps, whether they're physical or spiritual. No one, including me, wants to live amongst the mosquitoes, the bears, and the panthers, the precarity of water rising and land disappearing. And still, it is those edge places, discarded, doubted by the mainstream, where safety, resistance, and survival can live. There are corners of our own towns, our own minds, the internet, our own churches that are kindred to swamp, that can be insurgent ecology, where what might seem impenetrable, hostile to those who would harm us, is protective. A city of refuge, a place to plot freedom, a place to survive. to remember all those stories within our history, and there's so many that I could have told today, and I had to pick two, who eked out free living, carved out life amidst obliteration, who refused to give up, who found the places where the land and the water meet. Amen, and may it be so. I invite us to rise in body or in spirit for our closing hymn, which I have lost in my many, many pages, but I'm sure will appear hopefully behind me. Yes, number 210, Wade in the Water. Amen. Maybe you know a piece of swamp history, maybe a swamp, physical, spiritual, political, that you can share, a place of shelter amidst the mud, news of a city of refuge. Maybe you're a part of a swamp right now and can invite others in, a place of protection. The Chitimacha and their language live. The descendants of those who found freedom in the Great Dismal Swamp from slavery live. We look to the swamps, to the safety there. May we find it. We extinguish our chalice lighting flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
We'd like to give special thanks to our participants in this morning's service. Reverend Nguyen, thank you so much. Yeah. Peter, our usher, thank you. We know we kept you busy today. Our tech team is Don Swanson and Sarah Elstrom. Thank you so much. And our music director, Jacob Clapper. Thank you, Jacob. Our upcoming events include Connection Circle meeting online on Wednesday, the 30th, and for 1 hour of open conversation. The writing group meets the same day, Wednesday at 4 o'clock. The theme is, the writing prompt is, do you believe that the accounts of Jesus or Muhammad or Moses, whether the miracles that we know are fact or fiction? Annual reports. Please submit your annual reports if that is on your to-do list by next Sunday, only a week away, May 4th, enough to allow enough time to get them all compiled and ready for the annual meeting. Our stewardship drive, expanding our vision, has raised commitments of nearly $47,000 towards our goal of $50,000 next year. And if you have not returned your estimate of giving form, please do so as soon as possible by email or in person. Every gift is important and greatly appreciated. We're having a budget hearing on Sunday, May 18th, right after the service, probably with a little window for coffee hour. And put the annual meeting on your calendars for Sunday, June 8th, after the service. AA meetings meet in person in the parish hall on Mondays at 7 and Tuesdays at 8. At First Parish Canton, they have weekly small groups that are open to the wider community on Thursday afternoons, and for details, please go to their website. And now our remote participants are invited to stay online for a virtual social hour, and folks in the building are invited to gather in the parish hall for refreshments. Thank you for being here today. Go in peace, be at peace, extend peace.